I'm delighted today to be joined by the three founder members of Procure4Peace, Sammeli Sammalkorpi, Rohit, Sathe, and Lance Younger. So, guys, delighted to have you here today. It's incredibly pertinent, everything that's been happening in the world the last 4 weeks, hugely sad, but equally marvelous that you can mobilize so quickly to produce something like Procure4Peace. So I guess my first question is, who's behind the creation of Procure4Peace, and what are the organization's aims? And I'm asking that of you, Sammeli.
Thanks, Rupert, and great pleasure to be speaking here today. I can tell how it started from my perspective, but as you'll hear later on, there's, let's say, multiple different stories leading to Procure4Peace. But from my point of view, how it started, that obviously when the Putin's administration started attack on Ukraine, I think it was on Thursday, we at CIABO sort of figured out whether we want to kind of go public with our view that this is an horrible attack, and if so, what is the actual wording. Quite quickly, we decided that this our moral imperative at CIABO to kind of make that statement, and we did that I guess on Friday. At that point, I was basically contacted by a Ukrainian in Finland who was leading sort of the Ukrainians in Finland organization and asking how CIABO could help in the Ukrainians' effort in Finland to help Ukraine. And sort of long story short, quite quickly, I realized that there's a really kind of challenge how to bring the goods from Helsinki to Ukraine to support Ukrainian army and also to different volunteer organizations. And I did realize that through my connections to, let's say, Finnish procurement and logistics community, I would probably be well positioned to help. And in a matter of few hours, I had like 10 different offers from logistics companies. Yes, we can bring the goods from Helsinki to Kiev, and over the weekend we established a logistic corridor from Helsinki to Ukraine. And that was sort of initial success where I realized that the procurement and logistics community is super well positioned to help Ukrainians because there is the kind of procurement expertise, but there's also connections to logistics companies, but also companies supplying medical equipment, a lot of different kind of goods. So initially sort of was happy that something happened on the Finland, but then also started to think, okay, how can we do this in a more scalable way? Because of course this shouldn't happen only in Finland, but also in other areas. And how could we really mobilize the global procurement community to help Ukraine with the kind of unique capabilities that procurement has? So I guess I was thinking that on my side, but then also Rohit reached to me and Lance, pretty much having the same thought process. And that's how we kind of joined our forces and realized, okay, we need to kind of create something out of that. Let's give it a chance. And that's how we established Procure4Peace. And this is a volunteer organization with the unique mission to try to mobilize the global procurement community to help at least Ukraine in this case in their efforts.
Fantastic. Lance and Rohit, have you got anything to add to that?
No, I mean, for me, it's been very fast, and it continues to be very fast. It's funny because right at the same time as Sammeli was kind of posting and getting things mobilized, we picked up a little bit of that through the ProcureTech network, and it's something which I think it was a quote that you'd put out, Sammeli, and we actually published it on our weekly signals and as the headline. And it was then that Rohit actually pinged us both over the weekend and said, I don't know if you even read it, Rohit, but one way or another, there was a bit of serendipity there where he pinged us and said, guys, do you fancy having a conversation about whatever we can do? And so for 3 different reasons, we kind of got together over the weekend, and that's where things got going. But yeah, we can talk a little bit about what we're doing and how we're doing it. The key thing being that link as Sammeli mentioned, directly into Ukraine, and also Rohit kind of had direct links into Ukraine as well, which again might have been a little bit of the kernel of where things came from, Rohit.
Yeah, it's a very dear friend of mine since 2002. So when I heard the news, his face kind of flashed in my head, and just about that time I saw the post from Sammeli, and Sammeli and I, we don't even know each other. I just saw his post on LinkedIn. I saw Lance had shared it. I said, okay, let's just get together. My first view was, let's get together to help Volodya, who is the friend of mine. And then, that was sort of the inspiration. And
Yeah.
we roped him in to this initiative, and he's kind of our eyes, ears on the ground, so to say.
I think it's funny though. It's funny. We roped him in. I think quietly he's roped us in because he's been fantastic, and as Alina and Olga and Zoya, basically who are all Ukrainians on the ground, and from day one, there was a stark reality for us all of what we're seeing on the television, but it was actually we were living with it in real life. But without that, to be quite honest, we wouldn't be doing what we're doing now with that team on the ground. So yeah.
I think that's the reality. I mean, it struck a lot of us watching these newscasts about how I think, frankly, impressive, stoical, creative, innovative that the Ukrainians have been. How passionate they are as well. But what are some of the challenges that you have seen being faced by this, and how is Procure4Peace helping?
I can start, and last, Rohit, please compliment. I think sort of the one reflection we've had several times and still are having, that the kind of wartime context is quite different from your, let's say, normal procurement context in different ways. First of all, the time to market is really essential, especially in the beginning, but still nobody knows what will happen next day, next week, next month, and so forth. So really, we need to manage two time frames. We need to manage the time frame of, let's say, helping now and here, but at the same trying to kind of build something scalable and sustainable for the longer term. And it's almost like a paradox. If you don't get some help now, it may be that there's no reason to help in a month's time or in a 6 months' time. But at the same time, if you just focus on now and here, we are never going to make it the kind of more sustainable and scalable operation. So I think this kind of managing different time horizons is difficult. Secondly, the unpredictability, kind of how you can deliver the goods to different locations. It changes on a daily basis, so you can't plan for really kind of very structured stuff. It needs to be super agile compared to perhaps what the traditional procurement has been. Then at the same time, I think some of your typical procurement sort of challenges are there. You demand, you need to find the suppliers, you need to make sure there's no profiteering in the place, you need to organize logistics and so forth. So in really high level, it's the same stuff, just in very different time critical context that you have.
Yeah, absolutely. And Rohit, have you got anything to add on that?
Yeah, just to sort of segue from where Sammy left it, was that the biggest challenge is to operationalize. So there is the demand, there is the supply. So there is, intuitively speaking, there is a match, but there are a lot of operational steps that need to be executed in order to sort of convert that match into a marriage, so to say, right? And that is probably the most difficult part. But having the right kind of support on the ground and having an extremely sort of vibrant, connected procurement community, we're able to kind of get that going.
And I think that feeds into kind of the three things that we're kind of focused on. At the very basic level, Procure4Peace is kind of a platform. It's a website, and it's a community on LinkedIn and on Facebook that basically gives us a base to collaborate from. And then on top of that, we're basically meeting individual needs that are coming from organizations, whether it's medical supplies or food or whatever it might be. And then the third thing we're providing is actual people. It's manpower, whether it's local Ukrainians with procurement expertise or people from across the planet with procurement expertise, or software to be able to augment what's happening there. Because as well, I think one of the things that's quite important to remember is that we're focused primarily on non-governmental organizations, or CSOs as they're called. Very early days, we kind of had conversations with corporates and also with the public sector and NGOs, and it was very clear that it was the NGOs and CSOs that didn't have the capacity or the visibility or the skills to be able to meet the needs. Most of these organizations either don't have procurement, or if they do have procurement, they're not experienced in all the categories they're buying, or in the volumes that they're buying them in as well. So anyway, those are the kind of the three things that we've kind of mobilized, and to focus just on the kind of the NGOs and CSOs as well. Yeah.
Interesting. I mean, clearly, procurement and supply chain, as Rohit and I were discussing beforehand, has never been higher on the agenda. You know, it's to Rohit's board meeting later today. It's top of the agenda, and that has been in many instances a function of the pandemic. But how has the war impacted supply chains from what you're seeing?
I can take that. See, I think if we, I hate to do this, but if you were to put the war in the context of the global supply chain crisis that's been running for the last 2 years, I would say that the impact on supply chain of this war is limited in the big scheme of things. Okay, simply because the supply chain communities has already gotten used to something that is having a lot, sort of global implications, right? There are certain industries that are, facing the heat a lot more. So, if you're a grocer, or if you're a food business, FMCG company, which is buying a lot of grain, oil, those businesses are obviously severely hit. But if you were to look at the typical automotive tier 1 supplier or an automotive OEM, the impact is far less in comparison to what they've dealt with over the last 24 months. The bigger impact, in my view, has been, the explosion in the commodity prices and the volatility that has sort of triggered. And the big question is, how is that going to affect consumer confidence? And how does that consumer confidence then result into change in, the buying behavior of the users? I think that is the bigger question that needs to be addressed, because over the last 24 months, a tremendous amount of inventory has been built up, not just in industries and companies, but also in people's homes. So there is a bullwhip which is already in play. And now during this bullwhip, if the consumer sort of reacts in an extremely, cautious manner, i.e. pulls back the spending habit, you're going to have a tremendous amount of inventory that is going to be in the pipeline, in addition to what is already there. And this can sort of, trigger an issue that goes beyond supply chain, but then really starts to hit cash flows of businesses. So that's kind of my view.
Yeah, and I think that bullwhip is a good expression, is that because in reality, I think there's some supply chains that it's very, very evident where the problems are going to be, and they may be based upon industries, or they may just be based upon your footprint. Because you may be an automotive manufacturer that does have supply coming out of particular areas. I think some of the bigger issues that are going to face us are trade wars, the effect of sanctions, and the ripple effect from that, because that it's fundamentally changed. The move by Russia has fundamentally changed things for the next decade, at least. So yes, it's things are already changing, and it's just magnified that. And unfortunately, I mean, some of the things that we're doing as an industry or a function are and we've kind of put into practice during COVID, are starting to come into play now. If you look at one of the kind of partnerships we spun up is between Scout B and Barrow to help us as well. 5 years ago, Scout B was just a very, very small business, and now they put their hands up, say, how can we help? Yeah, Bureau put their hands up, how can we help? And basically they're working together now to meet some of the supply market insights that we need across particular categories of spend. So you've got these collaborative networks being formed. You know, yes, they still have to be agile, and they still sort of relatively immature against the need, but they are things that are being put in place, as Rohit said, to enable us to be able to manage the supply chain as well.
Interesting. Yeah, interesting. And is there anything that the three of you, think that can be done to help procurement professionals, particularly, I guess, who might be affected or displaced by the war?
Yeah, I mean, it's happening in a couple of different ways. I mean, so for example, you know, we started with sort of 4 people in Ukraine who basically were the kind of core team that have kept everything real, to be quite honest. And they've created a network of over 40 people in Ukraine that have either been displaced from their roles or have got time to volunteer. And effectively, they're then helping us locally with buying activities. Beyond that, you know, obviously people have been displaced, and we've had a few people on the LinkedIn group basically say, look, we've got a need for a procurement person or a developer of procurement software. Contact us. We can kind of give you work. You know, people like Circular did that on the development side, and others, and Solvent is a consultancy that's basically done it as well. And there are others as well. There isn't, as far as I know at the minute, there isn't a dedicated procurement headhunter, and maybe it's you, that's basically saying we can help place people just yet. But those are the things that we're doing so far to try and connect people to roles and activities.
I guess for many of us, we don't want to do anything that's too knee-jerk, because the country is going to need its best and brightest people to rebuild, and we all remain very optimistic that you know, whatever is happening now won't be happening in the months to come. But certainly, the longer it goes on, the more we're going to have to be thoughtful about the solutions that we can offer. And certainly, to your point, Lance, that would be something we would hugely want to help with. I guess my final question is going to be for you, Sammeli, in the first instance. But how can people support Procure4Peace achieve its goals?
I think sort of for all procurement professionals out there, I think the call to action is to join the LinkedIn group that we have, Procure4Peace. So procure4peace.org is the website, and then the LinkedIn group as well. That's the way you can sort of expose and make yourself available. Then specifically, if you have any expertise in protective equipment, medical supplies kind of categories, they are in high demand. And or if you are just generic procurement professional, but you have, let's say, some time in your hands right now so that you can volunteer into sort of project on, let's say, a couple of days a week or full-time basis, such sort of contributions are definitely helpful. Also, any super well-connected procurement professional, even if you don't volunteer, let's say, on a full-time basis, if you have some connections to, especially in these certain categories, medical supplies, protective equipment, so forth, food as well, increasingly. The rebuilding equipment will come later on. I think kind of volunteering, announcing yourself in the group is the way to go.
Yeah, excellent. And anything else, Lance or Rohit, you'd like to footnote that with?
Just super small one is that we know that people are basically they've got their own individual initiatives going on or solutions they're building. So, you know, there's a group that have built a platform which is a spin-off from Ariba, which is dedicated to buying medical supplies. So, you know, as these new platforms for helping become available, just continuing to let us know about them, and then we'll effectively can help to disseminate it and connect it so they get used in the best way possible. Because I think that's a big part of what, you know, we need to do is to collaborate and connect. And there are vehicles and channels to do that. Either it's through us, or there is an interagency procurement group, which is a group which is set up on behalf of a lot of the NGOs, which we're connected into, and there's others that as well. So as people's are developing ideas or solutions, just share them with us, and we'll make sure that as many people are aware of them and are using them as possible as well.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thank you, all of you, Sammeli, Lance, and Rohit. Thank you for bringing to life what Procure4Peace is doing. I think it's been very startling how people have mobilized right across the world, and how in the main people around the world are united in their thinking. But we will do everything we can to disseminate that message, and thank you for joining me today to discuss it further.